I'm a pastor of the Christian Reformed Church and have been an ordained pastor in that denomination since 1956. For the past 16 and a half years, I have served as its campus pastor at The Ohio State University. I live in Columbus with my wife, Joanne. Prior to coming to Columbus, we lived in Hoboken, New Jersey, serving there under the Board of Home Missions of the Christian Reformed Church as an urban pastor from 1964 through 1976. We came to Hoboken in September of 1964. Alberto Romero and his wife Lydia were already there. Alberto had been hired by the Board of Home Missions of the Christian Reformed Church, whose headquarters are in Grand Rapids, Michigan, to serve as a Spanish-speaking evangelist for the Hoboken Christian Reformed Church. When I came to Hoboken in September of 1964, he and Lydia were already there. I was, of course, asked if I wished them to stay to continue working among the increasingly prominent numbers of Spanish-speaking people in Hoboken, and I said yes. Lydia and Alberto had a son whom we come to call Johnny soon after we came to Hoboken. I don't remember the exact date. They lived in an apartment not too far from the church, and before long we began to hear complaints from Lydia concerning the way Alberto treated their infant son. Alberto, for instance, was afraid that Johnny, as we called him, was going to be left-handed, and so he tied Johnny's left hand to one side of the crib so he couldn't use it. Alberto thought that thereby he would force Johnny to be right-handed. I still remember one day when Lydia phoned me from their apartment in tears, asking if I wouldn't go with her to the police department so that she could file a complaint against Alberto for his mistreatment of Johnny. I said that I, of course, would go with her and went over to the apartment from where we had decided we would walk together to the police station. When I got to their apartment, Lydia had changed her mind. I always surmised that she didn't go through with her complaint because she was afraid of Alberto. Alberto's work soon proved to me to be unsatisfactory. He would not show up for staff meetings. He would be given assignments to do and not complete them. It was difficult to get any accountability from him or any sense of what he was doing. And early in the year of 1965, I recommended that his services for the church in Hoboken be discontinued. The process of considering that took quite a while, and as I recall, it wasn't until March or April that his services were finally to be suspended. The question of suspension had to be considered by the consistory and the Eastern Home Mission Board of the Christian Reformed Church, as well as the Board of Home Missions. And the judgment of all finally was that Alberto's work was unsatisfactory and that he should not be continued. A date was set for his departure. Prior to that, Alberto suddenly left Hoboken with Lydia and Johnny without telling any of us that he intended to leave. It happened this way. I had scheduled a staff meeting, I think a week or 10 days before he was scheduled to terminate his work for us in Hoboken, and he didn't show up for that staff meeting. I walked over to the apartment where they were supposed to live, and was told by the landlord that John, Alberto, and Lydia and Johnny had moved out a few days before and had left Hoboken. No one knew where they were or where they were going or why they had left. Apparently they'd left Hoboken in a rented car because they did not own one themselves. The prior Christmas time, Alberto and Lydia and Johnny had taken a vacation trip, and as I recall, a part of their itinerary took them through Texas. And during the course of the trip, Alberto called back to Hoboken wanting an advance on his salary because he didn't have enough money to get back to Hoboken, which we sent him. It turned out that the family that they were staying with in Texas, the name and address and phone number had been kept in my file. I have no idea where they lived or what their names were now. But still having that, after discovering that Alberto had left Hoboken without informing any of us that he was leaving, I called those folks, and they said, sure enough, Alberto and Lydia and Johnny had stayed with them and had, in fact, left the day before and were on their way to El Paso. I knew we had a church in El Paso, a mission church, the pastor of which was Roy Busco at the time in 1965. And I thought I'd better call him because Alberto might contact him and misrepresent his case. So I called Roy Busco, and Alberto had not been in touch with him, and asked him if he couldn't check around to see if Alberto had been in El Paso. I don't remember the details of all this conversation with Roy Busco, but he did check and found that Johnny had been brought dead on arrival to a hospital in El Paso with contusions all over his body. Roy Busco told me that the police had wanted to file charges against Alberto for abuse of the child, but had insufficient evidence to do so, and therefore had not. We were saddened, of course, to hear that Johnny had died in El Paso. We were told that Alberto and Lydia had crossed the border into Mexico at El Paso, and no one knew where they were headed. Well, after Alberto left and we lost track of him, I began to get calls from people in the neighborhood concerning Alberto, and checked out some of the references he had provided on being hired before my coming to Hoboken. I called the Evangelical Seminary in San Jose, Costa Rica. Alberto said he'd attended there, and was told by those folks that yes, indeed, he had been at the seminary, but only for a very short time because he was expelled, and I think I have the words pretty accurate, for insubordination and continual lying. He did not graduate from that seminary as he had led us to believe. A landlady of the apartment that the Romeros lived in called me after Alberto had disappeared, wanting to know where he was, because she had 2 rent checks from him. His rent had been in arrears, and he'd given her 2 checks, and she discovered that they were bad checks. They'd bounced, and she had gone to the police, who had issued a warrant for Alberto's arrest because of those 2 bad checks, and she was hoping I would be able to help the police find him. I went to the police and told them that I had traced Alberto to El Paso, and possibly into Mexico. They judged that the amount of the checks did not warrant their going to the trouble to try to locate him at that distance. Then a businessman in Hoboken who owned a furniture store and who dealt also in used furniture contacted us saying that Alberto had quite an extensive unpaid bill with him for furniture that he'd obtained during his stay in Hoboken from this businessman. And he wanted the church to pay the bill since the Christian Reformed Church had hired Alberto to work in Hoboken. He tried to argue that we were therefore responsible for any unpaid bills that Romero had left behind him. The treasurer of the church declined, by the way, to pay those bills. I don't remember how long it was after the Romeros left Hoboken that the internal, it was the Immigration Service, contacted me, wanted to know what I knew about Alberto because he was back in the States, and as I recall, somewhere in the South, Georgia perhaps, and complaints arising again because of the con games that he was playing, misrepresenting himself as a Roman Catholic priest, fleeing for his life from Spain. And I told them what I could, and they did not indicate to me what their intentions were at the time. It must have been 4 or 5 years ago that a person on the staff at the Newman Center, the Roman Catholic ministry at the Ohio State University, called to my attention the scandalous comic books published by Jack Chick, alleging to provide the true story of Romero. These were being distributed in Columbus, and the person on the staff at the Newman Center wanted to know if I knew anything about the Alberto Romero, who alleged all these atrocities of the Roman Catholic Church. I was surprised to find that it was the very same Romero that I had known in Hoboken. I believe this is about all that I can say. There were people on the board of home missions of the Christian Reformed Church at its central office in Grand Rapids, Michigan, that can verify this story and may have their own things to add to it. Thank you.